Good morning. Welcome to the Industry Conference. I'm Karina Rautenstein. I'm your conference programmer, and welcome to 3 for 30 From Words to Screen. This is our version of the morning talk show, so it's very exciting. Today's session is part of the Dialogues program, and I'd like to thank the OMDC for their support of that program. Also, just a reminder, there is no recording or photography inside the studio, but we are live streaming, so please tweet your friends and share on your social channels and connect with our online audiences tuning in. Today's session, we're mixing it up a little. We're giving these phenomenal auteurs a little moment in the sun in our talk show format, hosted by the Blacklists Franklin Leonard and Kate Hagen. Each writer will present a clip and discuss the process and choices behind their work, looking at original voice, so from the perspective of original voice, or literary adaptations, or films based on a true story. This morning's guests, very exciting. This morning's guests is writer-director Sean Baker, best known for his groundbreaking film Tangerine, amongst his many, many other award-winning films. He will present his new film, The Florida Project, and it's also screening tomorrow, 3 p.m. at Ryerson. Second up will be Nora Twomey, director and animator of The Breadwinner, and she'll be joined by the film screenwriter Anita Doron as they discuss the literary and animated adaptation of the acclaimed children's novel by Deborah Ellis, and that film screens also tomorrow at 3 o'clock, but if you're seeing The Florida Project, you can then see The Breadwinner Saturday on the 16th. And our third guest is Loung Ung, activist and author, whose life story and best-selling novel is chronicled in First They Killed My Father, directed by Angelina Jolie. That film screens Monday, September the 11th, 6 p.m. at the Princess of Wales. Without further ado, let's get started. Please welcome our co-hosts, Franklin Leonard and Kate Hagen of The Blacklist.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you to Karina for that amazing introduction and putting together what will hopefully be a really exciting conversation. It's the first of this sort that I've done, but I also, before we jump in, I want to introduce my colleague, Kate Hagen, who's the director of Community for the Blacklist. He's rocking an amazing t-shirt, if you haven't already noticed. As director of Community of the Blacklist, she is sort of the one most responsible for frequently communicating with writers, be it online or via social media. She's also a hell of a writer in her own right. And so I will be sort of playing the Ed McMahon to her Johnny Carson and sort of like moving the show along, but the real questions will be asked by her. I hire well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Sean Baker out, as Karina mentioned, Tangerine, here with the Florida Project. Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Baker.
Hello.
And I've always wanted to say this, roll the clip. So before we sort of get into the scene, it would probably be helpful, A, to sort of give us a sense of what the movie is without too many spoilers and sort of where this moment falls within it. And if you could describe a little bit of what happens in the scene, it would probably be helpful since it's not being live streamed for the people who will watch it online.
Sure. Well, The Florida Project is about a precocious 6-year-old by the name of Mooney and her little gang of friends who are growing up just outside the tourist capital of the world, Orlando, Florida. And we spend the summer with her and her friends as all the while her very young mother is struggling just to find the money to pay for the nights at the budget motel that they live at, ironically called the Magic Castle. And let's see, in this particular scene, we have the children, basically led by Mooney. They're giving a tour of the new girl, Jancy, the girl with the red hair in the clip. They're giving a tour of the motel in which they live, and you can tell they get into mischief pretty quickly. And Bobby, who is the motel's manager, is played by Willem Dafoe, And he's sort of the reluctant father figure, the guy who has, business to run and manage, and yet at the same time, a lot of kids to look after and families to care for, et cetera. So, yeah, I think is that?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Did I answer
Yeah.
it? Okay.
I'm going to begin by asking something I'm going to ask all of our writers today because I find this always a really fascinating topic. I wanted to ask about the specifics of what your writing space looks like, whether you write on pen and paper, whether you write on computer, are you at a desk, do you have to go somewhere, do you need snacks?
Right. I co-wrote the screenplay with Chris Bergosh, and we've now collaborated 3 times together. And in just the 6 years since we've started working together on feature screenplays. Our relationship goes all the way back to NYU and some television that we did together. But with these 3 screenplays that we did that turned into features, even in the 6 years, technology has changed, so it's actually our working space has changed. Of course, it's always been on a computer, sitting down on final draft, but how we've done it over the last few years has changed a bit because now you have you can share your page, you can be editing, you can be writing at the same time. You don't have to be in the same room together. So we use Google Drive where we can share pages with one another, and we choose which scenes to work on individually and then share them and edit them together. So, but no pen and paper. I think my handwriting is chicken scratch at this point. And Final Draft is really what we use.
Cool. I'm going to pivot to the film now. This is more to do with your last couple of films. Also, pardon me reading off my phone. You have so many different, diverse protagonists within your work, and I wanted to ask, whether personally or with Chris, how have you kind of developed your own personal voice through exploring these characters who are extremely different and come from these just like wildly different walks of life?
Yeah, it really depends on the project, but we decided going into Starlet that we wanted to tell a universal story that happened to be set in just a very particular community. And that happened again with Tangerine, happened again with Florida. And it's really, I think, our voice is coming through to a certain degree because of the universality of the actual, of the story. So we can use some of our own experiences, our own life experiences, and especially with this film, because this film is about childhood. And we've all experienced childhood, right? So we all have those stories, and we were able to actually use some of our own stories, even though we're telling, a story about a very particular community, and another gender, because we're both guys, and we're basically focusing on the summer of this little 6-year-old girl. Yeah, how our voices come through, I don't know. And it's, again, I hate being self-analytical. So because when I do, then I feel it always leads to contrivance. So we try to actually avoid being too self-analytical, right? So yeah.
All right. With this film, with Tangerine, with Starlet, we're creating this tremendous sense of empathy for these characters that are often kind of treated like punchlines or one-scene roles in another movie, but here they're kind of the stars of the show. How do you and Chris work together to craft character backstories before you begin the writing process?
Okay, well, it's not always crafted. Sometimes I wait, and a lot of times I like to wait until we cast. Because all of our screenplays, we don't have flashbacks, and we rarely even, I think I read a tweet yesterday that said something like I don't want to, talking about the backstory in Florida and how you really don't know the backstory, and that was an intention of ours. Mm-hmm. We felt like we wanted to live in the moment in that summer, and it's really up to the audience to interpret exactly how Haley got to this motel with her young daughter, why Bobby is there, what is his background, is he divorced? We don't know. But it's really up to the audience. But I do like to work with my actors in a way that they feel more secure. if they create a backstory and we create a backstory together. So it's usually after the fact. Of course, Chris and I talk about it and we say, oh, probably he comes from this background, probably this is what led him here or there. But in the end, I rely mostly on my actor because they're the one playing that character, and it's really nice to collaborate with an actor who's willing to explore that.
How does that affect then your rewriting process? I imagine so you have a template that you go into the proverbial production process with, but then if you're working with your actors to evolve the characters, how do you, when do you go back and massage the script, if at all? But how does that actual writing process work?
It's very unconventional. I mean, we are basically rewriting all the way up to the end of post-production. So we start with in this case, it's changed, it's varied with the 3 projects, but in this one, we had I guess you could say an initial treatment that we were able to get the attention of our financiers with, June Pictures. Then we fleshed it out to a scriptment when we actually started doing our research and spending time there. Then, by the time we shot, we needed something because of, listen, I like going into a film with basically a scriptment, half a script, half a treatment, like I did with Tangerine. It was around 70 pages long. So if it's, so that you can, that's not an entire script. I mean, the rule of thumb is 1 minute to a page to a minute to a page. But, so obviously we went into Tangerine with only a 70-page script, knowing that we were going to flesh out a lot in production. Through improv and just also during production writing extra scenes at night. This one is a little different because of the budget and because of every other obstacle that we were facing. Hot Florida sun and days, very hard, very tough. We had children with limited hours, very limited hours. And we were shooting 35 millimeter. So lots of obstacles and that caused delays. So we really we didn't have as much time. We did have time, especially with this scene, and that's why I brought it here, to play around. But for the most part, this was a feature-length screenplay, and there was the rewriting would only happen when we wanted to get ourselves out of problems, get ourselves out of corners we've painted ourselves into, or we felt the character arcs perhaps weren't working, or we wanted to figure out a new subplot. That stuff was happening at night. So I never edit. I mean, a lot of directors actually look at the dailies and edit during production. I can't do that because we're literally spending the precious 1.5 to 2 hours at night after we're already spent from a hard day to actually be rewriting and sometimes handing in new pages for the next day. And it's all based on what we shot that day and or shot prior. Like, what do we need to make this thing complete? And it's also a nice way, and also working with the actors on set. I mean, allowing improvisation, not just allowing it, but encouraging it. And I never force it, but because we have the written word there for them to fall back on if they want, but if they are so inclined to, and I've been lucky enough throughout my entire career to find amazing actors with that gift. It's a genius that you're born with if you can improvise, and especially comedic improvisation. It's incredible what my actors have brought to the screen. I can't even come up with a comeback. It takes me like a day to figure out a comeback. Oh, I should have said that. But these actors are like boom, boom, boom. And especially my Brooklyn Prince, the 6-year-old, is just going crazy with Willem Dafoe and some improvised scenes. It was really wonderful. And so anyway, and then of course there's post-production. And post-production, I'm the editor. So I'm literally rewriting through my edit. And that means that if I can, obviously, I'm not, isn't sort of it's not a studio picture, so I don't, and I'm the writer as well, so I don't have to, I can play around with it. And there is, especially with Florida, we had to deal, we shot many scenes that could actually fall anywhere. And it was up to me in post to figure out where they should fall for pacing's sake, exposition's sake, etc. So yeah.
I'm really glad you brought up the topic of improvisation because that's something I was thinking about watching this clip and having seen the film. How does that translate when you're working with children? Does that translate to like games on set, building camaraderie, that kind of thing?
It does. Samantha Kwan was the acting coach for the children, and she was so wonderful because she basically turned it into a summer camp. We shot last summer, all for 35 days, so it was basically the kids' summer. And they came every day like they were coming to summer camp, and they had exercises, games, but it was all about like getting their creativity flowing. And so that, and also, well, they were already, the reason I chose these three is that they were extroverts, and if they wanted to be, and they, I didn't ever have to worry about any sort of, I didn't have to worry about them shutting down. They were always ready to go and always ready to experiment, especially, Brooklyn with her improvisation was incredible. But the reason that I chose this scene to show is because that tour is one of those sections where it's underwritten on page. There was, everything else was written. I mean, like, Bobby's reaction, some of it. There was a little bit of improv in Willem's walk away at the end, which again is something I like to do. I'm walking with him as he's addressing the crowd, and I'm the one screaming out lines to him, hoping that he responds. And so I was like, pay the bills next time, Bobby. And he goes, you're due too, brother. And he does that right over my head, and I was like, yes. And so it was my way of actually almost writing with my actor and right there live.
I was going to ask, so are those, like, do you have like a sort of mental list of like, all right, here are the things that I'm going to fire at Willem while we're walking, and then you sort of, add those in and sort of post with the,
and then we have an actor replace my voice.
Exactly,
yes.
So you have like, is there like, do you have, 5, like, I know this sounds incredibly granular, but like, do you have 5 things? Do you have a sheet of paper? Did you think about them the night before? Like, all right, I know we're going to be shooting this walk.
Yeah.
What are the 5 things that would be valuable? Like, are there specific characters who you have in mind as the one speaking those parts? Like, how does that work for you?
Well, it depends on scene. It's scene to scene and actor to actor. So, for example, that one, it was about just having that scene come alive. So I knew I had to have him interact with somebody, and I'd rather have him interact with me because to try to fish for lines. Right. But the tour is something very different. We had a list of maybe 20, 30 things that we were going to, we had the kids memorize, obviously, a lot of it. Right. But I wanted that particular section to be as doc style as the most doc style the film got. And because not in its look, because it actually doesn't look very doc style. It has like a steady cam following them. But the way we shot it was doc style, and the way I edited it was doc style. Because we just literally took the tour with the kids. And I know it cuts down to only under probably 35 to 40 seconds in the film when they're walking up and down the 3 stories of the motel. But we shot that, I would say, for over 2 days and over the course of a couple of hours each day. So we would walk down the entire wing.
Like, do you have video of the entire motel, like every floor?
And we had asked the kids to improvise, and if we were inspired ourselves in the moment, we would say, Brooklyn, tell Jancy why, that there's a woman in this room who likes to talk to Jesus. And then she would just repeat the line for us, and we would get it. And then, but there were lots of times, kids will go, you have to, they started talking fantasy. I mean, like, you had Christopher saying, there's a dragon that lives in this room. But it was just, and we shot literally probably, I would say, 2 mags full, which is probably about 15 to 20 minutes of footage, and we just cut it down to that.
I was curious because, I mean, like, some of those lines are amazing. Like, look out for this water because one time I went to the hospital.
Okay, well, that's the perfect example of having an amazing actor who's improvising. That's completely that is 100% out of Brooklyn Prince's mouth. And it probably, I never asked her, but maybe something like that happened to her. I mean, and like, so she was actually just looking out for her 2 little pals and saying, don't slip on the water. And it was just this moment where we were just like, that's so genuine and real that we have to use it. And it's basically doc. And I like going with this hybrid thing between narrative filmmaking and what appears like and sometimes is documentary.
I wanted to ask, we've talked to a number of writers who say that writing children is among the biggest challenges that they face. How do you and Chris approach writing? Obviously a lot of improv and kind of like working with the actors on set is involved, but how do you approach that when you're sitting down to begin the script, knowing that you're going to be writing these characters who are very young and it's a difficult thing to capture?
Actually, we just made the rule that we're never going to have them speak like an adult. I think that's the biggest, that's my pet peeve with sometimes with Hollywood films where you see kids who are, they're 6 or 7, they're speaking like 30-year-olds. That's basically was where we weren't even going to go there. They can never be, if they are going to be witty and sarcastic, they might be messing up their grammar or something like that. We really wanted to make sure that it was authentic, and so basically it was just like us becoming 6-year-olds in writing the script.
But, I mean, that's a lot easier said than done. Because I think that what we've seen is, people try to do that, but they end up either writing like 30-year-olds or some weird hackneyed version of what sounds like a 30-year-old writing as a 6-year-old. And then the other sort of cop-out is, we saw this with the movie Gifted, which was a Blacklist script, where it's like, oh no, she's a prodigy, so it makes sense that she talks like a 30-year-old. Yes. But like, are you basically just saying like, look, we were able to capture it, we just tried to write it as that and it worked? But or are there conscious things that you're doing where you're constantly interrogating the line, like, okay, wait, does this sound like a 6-year-old would actually say it? Are you imagining it in your head as being said by a 6-year-old to make sure that that is consistent? Like, how do you actually approach the writing of those lines?
So, okay, here's an example. Has anybody seen the film out there yet? Okay, a few people. There's a scene in the film when they're sitting in a tree, and the tree has fallen over. It's literally like an uprooted tree, and they're sitting up there sharing a slice of toast with jelly. It's actually an homage to an Our Gang short. We're almost lying. Some of the lines are actually taken from an Our Gang short, in which it's Spanky McFarlane saying these lines. But anyway, the reason I bring it up is because when we were location scouting, we found this beautiful tree that just was so picturesque. And my producer, Shi Ching Zhou, said to me something that was just so poetic. She was like, look at this tree, it's uprooted. Why it's so beautiful is because it's uprooted but still growing. And I was like, there's the movie right there, that's the movie. So we wanted her to say it. We wanted Mooney to say it. But if she said, you know why I love this tree? Because it's uprooted and it's still growing. That doesn't work for a 6-year-old. So we basically had to pull it way back, simplify it. And then I think we actually even asked Brooklyn herself, like, how would you describe that tree? And she goes, well, it tipped over, but it's still growing. And like there was something that was just, that's how it's simplified. And then and often I actually ask the people who, part of, work, and again, working with an actor, I get to ask them, how do you think this would come out of your mouth? I don't know if we actually did ask her, but there was a lot of discussion about that line, about how to bring it to a 6-year-old level.
You mentioned earlier spending some time at, I don't know if you spent time specifically at the Magic Castle, but all of your films have such a specific sense of time and place. How does that play into your writing process? At what point in the process are you kind of visiting these locations and like getting the vibe for all of that?
Location comes very early on, very, very early on. It's almost sometimes the catalyst. It's the inspiration. I mean, in Tangerine, the corner of Highland and Santa Monica, that's all we had in our head when we went into it. I mean, I pitched it to Mark Duplass saying, I want to make a film about the corner of Highland and Santa Monica. That's all. And then he gave us the green light, and then we had to immerse ourselves, and we befriended Maya Taylor, and then from that point on, we started to flesh something out. But so it's looking at a location for a specific reason. I mean, obviously, the location of Kissimmee in Orlando, Florida, came to my attention through my co-screenwriter, whose mother lives there, and also Chris Bergosh is knows is a big fan of Disney and knows all Disney. So basically, he brought me these articles that were written about this area and this situation of the hidden homeless living in budget motels right outside the parks, and I was saddened and shocked by it. I didn't know of this situation. I didn't know that it was a nationwide situation. And so, but it really stemmed from him saying, look, this is happening in this location. And Chris and I would, well, first off, his mother lived there, so he was there often. Then I was actually taking trips there and starting to, and we just had to absorb it. So yeah, spending time in the location and with the community that you're focusing on is extremely important. It's time. It takes a lot of time. In this case, we actually we went to many motels. We met with the managers at the motels. We met with residents. We then found all the colorful locations that pop up in the film that are all like sort of tourist-driven locations, and those inspired scenes. And so I think we couldn't have written. Let's just say this: we couldn't have written this script just sitting in our room in West Hollywood. Right. No, you have to go. You have to go and be a part of it.
So I think I'm going to ask a final question. I'm going to steal this one, Kate. It's really fascinating to me because you do something. It only just occurred to me to hear you mention that like this sort of started with an article, but you're doing films about subcultures, worlds that are often overlooked. And oftentimes when people try to tell stories about those worlds, especially if they're not their own, they easily slip into being an issue film. And Tangerine it's just not, it's a story about people. And the consistent thing that I've heard about Florida Project, having not seen it yet, is that you're not thinking about the issue when you're watching the film because you're just overwhelmed by the emotion of responding to the humanity of these characters. How do you approach writing about subcultures and sort of this idea that this stuff can be freighted as important, but focus on the humanness of the characters and telling a human story that has universality through its specificity?
Well, we saw that our approach to Tangerine, in a way, the fact that it was entertaining audiences first, but it was leaving them with something to discuss and think about, and bringing an awareness to a situation. That kicks in, I think, right after the film ends. When you're, that was our goal with that film, and that's what we tried to repeat with this one. But it really stems all the way back to, this is my sixth film and my sixth feature, and I co-directed a film called Takeout with Shi-Ching Zhou, the woman I just, my producer I just mentioned. And Takeout was, of all of these films, I would say Takeout's the one that you could actually say it is a plight of film, right? And I think these films are wonderful, and we need them. But there is a danger, as you said, they can become condescending and disrespectful to its subjects, and to the subject matter. And we feel that Takeout was about an undocumented immigrant dealing with his smuggling debt. So it was a very there was the universal stories I was talking about earlier. There is friendship in this film, and there are those themes, but also it's a very, very specific. It deals directly with his struggle. We decided after that point, going into Prince of Broadway, I know we have to wrap real quick, I'm sorry, that we basically didn't want to do that with the next film. The next film, we wanted to tell a universal story, something that, yes, it is very specific in terms of location and community, but we wanted it to be something that no matter where you are in the globe, you can identify with, and you'll connect with the protagonist through a very common issue or struggle, right? So that happened with Prince of Broadway. That went on to Starlet. Starlet's about the porn industry basically, but it's about a friendship between a 20-year-old girl and an 80-year-old. It's about friendship ultimately. Right. Then that went to Tangerine. Then that went to
Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Baker.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
All right, we're gonna bring out our next team, actually. Nora Twomey, director animator of The Breadwinner, and screenwriter Anita Doron. Welcome.
Good morning.
So we're going to roll the tape. I love saying this.
We should mention for this one, we
yeah.
actually have a clip from the film, we have a storyboard, and then we have some script pages, so we're going to take a look at all of that stuff.
Yeah, this is an embarrassment of riches. So I think we're going to start with the storyboard, then go to the actual scene, and then we're going to let you guys walk us through the pages, if that works for you. Yeah?
Cool.
Roll the tape. Actually, one thing before we jump to the pages, since most of the people here probably haven't seen the film, if you could give us a little bit of what is the story, where does this scene fit within it, and for the folks who may see it online who won't have been able to see the scene, a bit of what happens in the scene, just very quickly.
So this is quite early in the film, and we have met the family, and we understand their circumstances, and then something horrible happens, and somebody's taken away from them. I don't want to give away too much, hoping that you
Yeah, no
will
spoilers, that's fine.
get. So this is just Parwana's transition into becoming a storyteller, or using storytelling to make sense of her world and her emotions and help others.
I think maybe to give a broader context for the scene as well, so just to tell you a little bit about the film in general, it's the story of an 11-year-old girl who's growing up in Afghanistan during the Taliban years. it's a time where young girls and women weren't allowed outside without a male relative to accompany them. So when Pravana's father is taken away, she's the only one in her household who can take up the mantle and become the breadwinner of the family. So that's kind of where the scene starts off, or where the scene fits in the film.
Should we jump to the pages? Do you want to walk everybody through those, or?
Or we can just chat and
Let's start with the chat, and maybe we'll
Yeah,
pivot there.
absolutely. I want to begin by asking about process, and this is a very unique process because we're working in the world of animation and also in the world of adaptation. So what is your process like, Anita, as the writer beginning, taking a book, knowing it's going to be in an animated film? How does that inform your process when you're writing? And then Nora, when you're reading the script, how do you begin visualizing that for the screen?
So this is the book. So I read the book, and the first thing I do is it's kind of a method writing what I do. I start to feel the feelings of the main character. The circumstances don't matter, the culture, the place. It's secondary. First of all, I want to understand the person, what kind of person she is, because the feelings we have across time and space are the same. The fear I feel and the fear Parvana feels is the same fear. So I kind of become one with her feelings and her thoughts and her world. And then I read the book and read it over and over again. And then I start to explore the specifics, her culture, what colors she sees every day, what sounds she wakes up to, what food she eats. It's very important. So I eat the food. It's delicious. If you like rice.
This is a process I can get behind.
Very important. And then I spend a lot of time just looking at images. And I try to listen to music, the local music, even things that may seem irrelevant, like heavy metal of Afghanistan today. How does it inform Parvana? It informs how feelings are processed by musicians or by metal singers in Afghanistan. So everything becomes relevant, and I kind of meander from one thing to the next and take in images. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what it means. I just let it happen, and I become completely lost. And luckily, I have a very good friend, an artist, who calls himself the Afghan redneck. And he has helped me understand what makes sense from the perspective of the culture and the place, and what doesn't, and what I might be imposing from my own world, and what is authentic. And then I begin writing the script, and I have no clue what's happening to me. It's just kind of first takes over, and I'm not thinking about structure. I'm not thinking about act 1, act 2, act 3. I let it all go. I don't care. I just let the feelings of the character guide me, and then it becomes possibly a bit more important later when we want to establish a rhythm to the story, because storytelling, filmmaking, it's like songs, it has to have its own rhythm, the bridge and the quieter part. So yes, it's important, but when I'm writing, I don't care. I just want to flow, and that's where the method writing is very strong, because I'm in the world, I'm feeling it, I'm imagining, I'm hearing the voices, and so my research really pays off because I'm there.
And then I wanted to ask too about the process of reading the script for the first time, what that looks like, how kind of your director, animator brain begins working.
Yeah, because animation is a strange medium, because it's not like a live action script where you go off and you shoot it straight away. You have to enter your editing process straight away when you're delivered a script that you feel is ready to go. And you know that you're going to, so the editing process for animation is, you saw that very rough board. Basically, I'll sit with a script and with the microphone and with one storyboard artist. But for a film like this, because it was so sensitive, I just used one storyboard artist to get a pass of the entire film done in about 9 months, I think. So I would draw over his drawings. I would test out the dialogue in the film, and to see what we needed and what we didn't need, and how to I guess with a film like this as well, I was always aware that even from the subject matter that people were going to want to sit back a little bit. They mightn't even go and see the film because it's, you know, it's such a harsh subject matter to imagine it in animation. You might think, well, I don't really want to emotionally engage to that degree. So I knew we had to make something very beautiful, something that where the animation was very subtle and very universal gestures and all of this kind of thing. All of this was in Anita's script because, again, you got the sense that she was seeing everything and from the inside of a body, you know, kind of thing, sitting in a room, she was seeing everything. That meant that there was so rich, so incredibly rich. The way she writes description is economic but poetic. So you usually get one or the other, but it was both. When it came to, because again, because the animatic process is very rough. I'm on an independent film as well. You're aware that you have to figure out as much as you can, as quickly as you can, because things become very expensive. If I went to animation with a scene like that and I hadn't worked out exactly what I was going to keep, that's a very expensive problem to have, and it means that money doesn't get spent on something else. So all of these are factors, I guess, that I take in. But at one point in the film, I'm utter control freak, and that's the point, that first animatic, I think, where it's just really scrappy drawings. It's, you know, a few rough sound effects, some temporary dialogue, temporary sound, putting that all together, because that's the film. That, you know, not many people can read it because it's so rough, and because it's my voice doing, you know, talibs, you know, going from character to character. But I know that once I have that, I have the film. So yeah.
You both mentioned editing within your process, and I think that can be a really difficult thing for a lot of writers to kind of develop their own kind of internal editor who's kind of telling them to kill your darlings. How do you both, it's an ongoing process with editing, so how do you both kind of develop your internal goalpost of knowing what to keep and what can go when developing the script towards production?
I think it's very, very important to kill your darlings. And murder them, drown them.
There's massacres everywhere.
Put them in a lake and let them go. Whatever way you can do it, you have to do it, because sometimes we get attached to things that don't make sense. And I think I probably had to let go some of my favorite parts, especially in this early setup, the storytelling of Afghanistan's history. I got so wrapped up in the richness and the pain and all the complexities, and I was really focused on I must convey how complex it is and how, you know, we have to understand, but you know, everything that happened in the history of Afghanistan in order to understand Parwana's reality. But, you know, we don't really have to understand everything. We have to understand the surroundings and just enough to kind of connect the dots. And then, you know, when I was starting to write, it was very hard to let go, and my scripts really suffered. And the moment I decided I have to just, without any emotion, let go and keep finding the script and not be attached to anything, as in life, you know, the better the script will be, and then the film.
For me, I guess because always wanting to edit, like sitting at an edit machine while it kind of it's crafted from script into a storyboard. It's always on my mind, you know, editing, I guess. But also, once you had delivered the screenplay, that one storyboarder that I had also is a filmmaker himself, you know. So he would just run through very roughly scenes, but once he hit something, we had a character in it. We had the story world, we had the real world, and we had another character that kind of went between the two worlds. And every time he began a sequence that had that character in it, he was flustered and frustrated, and he didn't know how to proceed with it. So it was just instinctual. It wasn't an intellectual decision. This character must leave because it takes, you know, it adds a sense of destiny to the film that we don't want. It was afterwards we were able to understand why the character had to come out. It was literally a kind of a gut feeling. And I think a lot of this film, because I also became paralyzed with the beginning of the film and trying to give a context, because it's very important for the entire film that we have a sense of context, that it's not just about the Taliban, it's about conflict everywhere. It's not just about Piranha, it's about children, everywhere. So to give that context without getting carried away and feeling that you have to, especially when you research something and you realize how connected, where the Taliban come from, kind of thing, and you realize how connected we all are and how responsible we all are, for things that are going on in the world. So, but to just give enough of that, but not to overwhelm. You remember things. This is it. Food is important. Things that take the chaos from us, rhythms in our lives and in Piranha's life that she can hold on to when everything is swirling around her, So in the creation of a story and the construction of a story, that's important too, finding the things to hang on to.
And if I may add, you mentioned responsibility, and I felt an immense responsibility to do justice to the story and to the history of Afghanistan, because we don't, from what we get from the media and from, it's all rushed, it's all bits and pieces, they don't tell the story, they don't make sense, they don't convey what is the everyday person feeling and how they're living their lives. So, if you imagine Afghanistan, you don't think, if I may come back to heavy metal music, you don't think heavy metal concerts or headbangers or hipsters or skateboarders, but it all exists. So it was really important for me to show you the fullness of this world, and once you start researching the history, you see there's so much there, and it's so interesting and fascinating, and and then you have to let go. No. And we must trust the audience to connect and understand and have just enough for them to then have a thirst to learn more.
I wanted to ask about the sort of post-animatic, pre-final film writing process, which I find fascinating, both having worked at a studio, because I guess the closest analogy would be reshoots, which you don't really get on an indie film, but you essentially make the movie once with you and the storyboard artist, and then you see what works and what doesn't work, and then you make the movie again. How does that writing process work? Because I imagine that's a lot more collaborative in terms of like the actual writing. Like, okay, we need a scene here, this is coming out. How do you approach that?
That first animatic was maybe 10 minutes longer than the final film ended up. That is the film, really. We layer on top of that more, the film. With the second pass of storyboard, that first pass sorts out our story, really. And the second pass is about, okay, now locations, because, the room has been growing and shrinking and we don't know where the prison is in relation to the town and, all of this kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that creeps into the maybe 4 or 5 passes of animatic that happen after that. We do trim all the time. After that first animatic where I feel I understand the film, that's when the editor comes on, so he's going to start hacking away at it as well. So on independent film, it's different, I think. And also, I think this film in particular, I think as well, because, the next film I work on, I'm sure we'll have like 5 or 6 storyboard artists working, at the beginning of the process, and we'll be all trying to write our storyboard with the same personality, I guess. Whereas this, I knew I had to only work with people whose sensibilities were really close to my own. That was with the screenwriter. We couldn't have massive arguments about, what's right and wrong for Afghanistan. What do we leave our audience with? Basically, we had to intuitively be on the same page with that, so that we could focus on all the subtleties. And the same with the storyboard artist, Julian Renard, who was aligned as well. And then once that was in place, we could start thinking about filmmaking, as in, how big the room is, the language of the camera. All of this kind of stuff came after it. It was literally building the film layer by layer after that.
Returning to the clip itself, I wanted to talk about kind of finding this line, knowing that you are creating an animated film that is going to have an audience of children. Finding this line of not only real world terror, but imagined terror, and making it scary enough that you feel like you're being authentic to the source material and kind of conveying the amount of struggle in that world, but also not making it too scary so that it is alienating to children, and just kind of finding where that line exists.
I think you discover that line bit by bit. First, you just immerse yourself and you create a scene that makes sense to you, and you feel it, and you feel the fear. I didn't really think, and I'm sure it might be different for you, I didn't really think about the children, the audience, any of these levels. I just wanted for the scene to make sense and lead us into the story world and the reasons why she's telling, and then all the different complex relationship. And the scene, you can see the scene as it's about the sisters, and the subtleties. In the beginning, there's conflict between them. In the end, even through the way they look at each other and the understanding when the mother gets up. I find it one of my favorite moments in the scene is when the two sisters look at each other after the mom, Fatima, gets up. Then it's about the mother's loneliness and the mother's fear. It's about Zaki's longing to be held by his mom. It's about Parwana, figuring out what's her role is and what is her role in the family. So many elements, you can get lost in them. You just have to let your intuition lead you.
I'm going to use that as a pivot to the pages, if that's okay with you, because I actually am really curious how much of that is on the page. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
All right. You have the clicker, right? Can we put the pages on the screen?
Somewhere. Yeah, in my book.
Is that an option? Right? That looks like progress.
I'll just keep clicking. Oh.
No. I mean, these are beautiful images, though, on the bright side.
The poster.
No. Maybe we're there? Not quite? All right. You were going to say something, Nora. So while we work on that.
Yeah, I was just going to, because from working on Song of the Sea and The Secret of Kells, which is our previous films, I was always really surprised by what affects children and traumatizes children, and what adults think traumatize children. And that there's a huge difference. And the same with the test screenings. When we had maybe the second or third rough animatic, we screened it here in Toronto for adults and children, and the same back in Ireland. And I stood in the foyer as people were coming out, and the children were chatting, and the adults were red-eyed and telling me how they felt that children would feel about this, and that, like, if they knew what was going on, really, that you're not showing, and all of this. So I've since shown it to very sensitive young girls who are scared by Harry Potter films and have no problem with the Breadwinner, So. Wow. So it's interesting how children react. We should never take it for granted, and it's always an exploration. And I don't know. We make our animatics, we test them out, we try and talk to children. We have children, as little test subjects and that. It's very complex, but we don't take it for granted. You can layer your story in a way that children feel secure. I love making films that have children asking questions and have them asking their parents questions. Films that you don't just plonk a child in front of and go off and do, your vacuuming or whatever while your child is watching a film. Just sit with your child and talk about things. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we have a generation of children who just don't look at sound bites and make their political opinions based on whatever, that they actually think, wouldn't that be amazing?
It would. I don't know that we're going to have time to do the pages, but I did want to ask the question. The look, Zaki's desire to be held, is that explicitly stated on the page, or is that subtext that then you guys are having a conversation about as the animatic is made?
It's definitely mostly subtext. It's never written on the page, Zaki wants to be whole, because the script is such a blueprint and so concrete. But writing The Breadwinner was one of the greatest creative experiences of my life, mostly because of Nora, and Nora and I were making the same movie. So everything we were trying to do and striving for and looking for and longing was the same thing. It's such a gift for a writer to have a director like this to work with, and when we would, improve scenes and talk about the script, the back and forth between us would just inspire me to, make it better, make it truer, more authentic, look for the right feeling, and so thank you for that, Nora.
I think that there's always a missing ingredient. I think as you layer the film, like people add, So all the other storyboard artists added, the voice cast added, an incredible amount to this film. Some of our cast were Afghan. They brought their own stories, their fathers and mothers' stories, how they came to Canada. A lot of them. So all the way along, you have people adding elements to it. With Saki in particular, I wasn't sure whether it was going to work because we were going from seeing something very traumatic with Fatima to going off into story world, and it was always a tonal leap for me that I wasn't sure was going to work until we got that voice performance from it was my son was Zaki's 3 different children. We used 3 different children for different things. One was good at crying, one was good at, so for that one, we used him. But it's funny because when we were in the sound booth, I was talking to the sound engineer and we were getting ready for it, and I realized that he was 5 at the time, but he had a very squeaky voice, so he started punching himself. I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, that's how I'm going to make myself cry." And I said, no, you have to, we just say the words and we think of sad things and we think more sad things, so we just kind of, kept doing that until he started to cry. And then afterwards I asked him what was he thinking about, and he said that in the place called heaven, it's not just it's not just old people, it's young people who kill each other too,
Oh my God.
So yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you guys had a really open, communicative, supportive partnership, but in any creative collaboration, there are going to be moments where there are disagreements. How do you guys kind of tackle those? And how do this scene has to stay, no it doesn't, this line of dialogue has to stay, no it doesn't. How do you kind of negotiate that so that you make sure that both of your contributions are feeling included in the project?
Again, I mean, this is strangely aligned, as in one of us would begin a sentence and the other would finish it, or you just wouldn't bother finishing the sentence because the other one was nodding, So, but there was also, Anita doesn't jump to defend her work the minute that you ask, kind of thing, can we try it another way? She would immediately understand that things needed to be different and how they could be different. So again, it was with this process and with the budget and everything like that, the less time you can waste with egos, the better. So that was extraordinary. I've never had that experience before because I do it myself. I start defending my work immediately, and it takes me a couple of days before I can say, okay, let's try it this other way, and you never did that. You were just immediately flowing like water, so which is amazing.
Well, because it's not personal, it's not about me, it's about the story, and my role is to go into the story and tell it, and give the script that most conveys the world, the visuals, and triggers our imagination to be there with the characters.
Do you want to ask one final question?
It's all yours.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, to wrap up, kind of this idea of you're making an animated film. Obviously, you're going to have an audience of children, but as you mentioned, kind of leaving one of your screenings, you have adults who are taking away something very different from the film. I was wondering about the animatic process, and you said you've been screening for children. What is that like, to bring children in to see the film in its early stages and kind of get a vibe for how they're feeling about it?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because again, they children have such huge imaginations. So I was never sure, especially with drawings as rough as that, they fill in the blanks a lot, So we had questionnaires coming out, and sometimes we realized with the rough drawings that children were reading into it something completely different than what would eventually be on the screen, even, because they're incredible imaginations. So that making sure that your animatic was at a point where they could read what was actually going on, I suppose, was a big thing. Yeah, but I think at the point where we had children watch it, we had our actual voice cast, so it was like you could actually close your eyes and just listen to a radio play of the film. So yeah.
Very cool. Well,
Very sadly, we are out of time.
yeah. Thank
Everybody,
you so
let's
much, ladies.
Thank
yeah.
Nora and Anita.
Thank
And
you.
I forgot to do this with Sean, but Florida Project screens tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Ryerson. The Breadwinner tomorrow at 3 p.m. as well, and Saturday, September 16th. So be sure to check it out. And thank you again.
Thank you.
And we have one more, which is very exciting. Loung Ung, activist and author whose life story and best-selling novel is chronicled in First They Killed My Father, directed by Angelina Jolie. Please welcome Loung Ung.
Just spill stuff all over myself.
Don't worry.
I did earlier, so I wouldn't worry about
Nice to
it.
meet you.
Wrong.
I guess we'll start with the video, and then we'll, for the last time, roll the tape. So we started all these conversations the same way, but if you could give both the audience here and sort of eventually on the internet some sense of where this moment happens in the context of the story as a whole, without too many spoilers.
So the Khmer soldiers stormed into the country on April 17, 1975. And at the time, my family and I were living in our homes in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, which had a population then of approximately 2 million people. And the whole of the city was evacuated in 72 hours. And so we were told when the soldiers came in, I was on the street playing hopscotch with my sisters, and then the soldiers pulled out their bullhorns, started screaming for us to pack as little as we could to sustain us for 3 days, because the city was gonna get bombed, and then if we didn't leave, we would all be killed. And so we packed what little we could carry. And we first left the city in our truck, and then eventually that ran out of gas, and there was no gas, and everything collapsed, the system, the economy, and so we had to start walking. And as a child, this started when I was 5 years old. We all had to carry what we could when we got off the truck. And I chose the pot because I thought it was easy. My parents were carrying different things. So this is, it was a 7-day walk out of the city. And this was on that walk when the pot and the heat and the people and everything was so relentless. And that I remember very specifically how heavy the pot got the longer we walked, and how it kept banging. It didn't matter where I put it. It didn't matter which hands, or one or two, or that it would bang on my shin everywhere I went. And the sound that made when the pot banged on my shin. And so it was amazing to write that scene from me, and then to see it translate into film, and then the sound design and the people and just the background noise, but also just the sound of the pot banging. It was as if I was reliving it all over again.
I mean, I was going to ask that as sort of the obvious question. What is that like emotionally? To have, I mean, I feel like you've sort of written this story on 3 occasions. I mean, you lived it, and then you wrote it in prose form, maybe 4 times, and then screenplay form, and then seeing the thing itself. How is that emotional? Like, what is that emotional progression like experientially?
Yes. You know, as a writer, you know, it's such a solitary position in work. When I was writing the book, and I wrote it originally as a book, and that came out in year 2000. When you write, it's you and your computer and your demons and your mind and yourself, that it's just it. And back then, I didn't know enough to realize that you need a lifeline. When you're gonna go into a place so deep, you need a lifeline. And I thought I had it by having a rice pot that was constantly cooking rice, because that made me felt like home. Right. But I didn't have enough people I could call when I was in that hole. And so it was writing the memo was a lonely, scary, you know, cathartic. I came out of it much stronger, but still the journey itself wasn't that much fun. It was actually quite painful and traumatic. Writing a screenplay was really interesting. It was a process of, you know, first of all, you have 100,000 words when you're writing a book.
Right.
You have 100,000 words. You can build slowly the story and the scene, and you don't have to think about, for me anyway, writing a memoir, I didn't have to think about climactic scenes and actions. I was really into character buildings and telling people what it was like for my family and myself, and then what our lives were like. Writing a screenplay, you actually have to take back a lot, you know, and where in a book, you're writing tone, you're writing setting, you're writing hues, you're writing story, you're writing dialogues, you're writing everything. In a screenplay, you have to, for me, really allowed or really know that you're gonna work with people you trust, actors who will put in the interpretations, directors who will put in their, you know, their heart, and then cinematographer who will put in their talents. And so in some way it was a lot of fun to just write the story, the plot, and a little bit of descriptions. And then emotionally, you know, that was actually fun. And then I went to Cambodia for 4 months when we were making the movie, and was on the set pretty much every day. Then I found myself again in this emotional hole, because now I'm seeing it come to life. Whereas when I was writing a screenplay, it wasn't really that. It was, I mean, I've already done the book, but to see it in front of me, to see the actors, to see the cows, to see the 500 soldiers coming toward me in their black clothes, and some of the process I was aware of. Before I went to Cambodia, I knew that I wanted to protect myself by getting physically strong. Because I had read, I've never worked on a film before, and I've read that you can work long hours, and we're going to be in Cambodia where it's 110, 115, 118 degrees heat with 90-something% humidity.
Yeah, that's not hospitable.
No, not even for me, and I'm from there. I mean, so I got physically strong. I started doing yoga, I started running, because I wanted to last physically. And then I got there, and film is such a journey, but it's a journey together. And I realized that my childhood trauma was coming up, and that I wanted to be physically strong, also because I felt so powerless going through it the first time. That I was gonna go back and I was gonna have power. And there was one day when we were filming on a movie, filming on the set, and the Armory gave me a fake gun, and I was just testing it out, and I saw the line of 500 Khmer Rouge soldiers coming toward me. And I guess I didn't realize what was happening, but the next thing I know, Angelina, my friend Angie, came rushing toward me, screaming, "Loung Ung, stand down, stand down." I had no idea what was happening, but I guess my body stance was, you know, I was just getting into the way of the soldiers. I don't know what I was doing, but my body just reacted. Wow. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about this kind of difficult emotional space to be in as a writer, and then when you're on set as well. How do you find that reserve to return to when you're returning to a lot of memories that are very painful and very difficult? You mentioned wanting to get physically strong, but that emotional strength, how do you kind of, for lack of a better term, psych yourself up to return to that world and make sure you're portraying it accurately?
Well, one, I knew this was a story much bigger than me. That when you're writing a book, it's you again and the computer and your words and your demons. But when you're making a film, you are in this beautiful orchestra with beautiful instruments, with really wonderful people who are there to collaborate, to coordinate, to be of support to each other. And it was such a lovely experience. It was so lovely that I went into it fearing what was going to come up for me. And then to be in Cambodia and to film with people, and all the people on the set, and all the Cambodians had their own experience of the genocide during the war that, from 1975 to 1979, that claim 1.7 to 2 million lives, and out of a population of 7 million. And so everybody there, whether they were young or old, had immediate, intimate experience with the genocide. And so it was really from realizing and trusting that you're not alone in this journey, that you don't have to be. You could choose to be alone. You could choose that, but you have to trust that if you're there and you allow yourself, people will be there to lift you up, and you can be there to lift them up as well. And so that for me, the healing of the work, when you're with so many people, amplified in some way the collective healing of our trauma and what we went through. And that gave me a lot of strength to get up even when it was hard, to just know that I am not alone in this, and that I don't have to be, and I can be there for people the way they are there for me. And that really helped.
You touched on this with speaking about the pot, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the questions I was going to ask about, there's such a vivid sensory world within this clip. And I was wondering, as you're approaching that kind of sensory world to bring the audience, whether it's a book reader or film watcher, into this world, how do you kind of decide which details remain, which get cut, the very specific sensations you want to convey, and if that differs, obviously, from prose versus a screenplay?
Yeah. I wrote my book from the point of view of a child in first-person present tense. And I wanted to do that because I grew up studying Chinese history, Russian history, American history, and then there were no places where I could study Cambodian history. And when I started reading a lot of Cambodian history, there weren't a lot of people to discuss it with me. And there was so much going on. And there are actually a lot of books out there. William Shawcross, SciShow, Henry Kam, Cambodia, Report from Stricken Land, Nyan Chanda, Brother Enemy. They were wonderful, wonderful books. And when I was reading and deciding to write, I decided I wanted to write for a younger audience. I wanted to write for people. I wanted to vibrate people's heartstrings. Because I think before we can actually before we will want to learn the informations and the facts and the data and the history, we have to vibrate our human heartstrings. We have to care. We have to know. We have to realize that this happened to a family in a faraway place with people, with somewhat strange names. But these are mothers and brothers and sisters and family members, and we all possess the same human hearts that 7 billion of us possess to this day. And so when I was writing from a child's point of view, it was, I had to really put myself in that place. And it wasn't hard because it happened to me when I was that age. So it was a little bit of meditation, but it was also a little bit of allowing yourself to go in really, really deep. And I'm very visual, I'm very observant. I think most writers are. We love watching stuff. We love paying attention. Like I notice, people's shoes. I notice the last speaker's and her scarf, and I could write a whole sentence around that, a whole paragraph around that. And life to me comes much more alive when I'm noticing the things that pop. Because everything else, especially as a child, happens too fast, too confusing, too raw. And you need to anchor it with something that you understand. The war, the trauma, the soldiers, all of that was happening. And as an adult, I can see it. But as a child, it all moves so fast. But if I can just anchor it on my shin, that for me is, that puts me back in my body. And I think when I was writing the screenplay and the book, I always wanted to be put back in my body because the war was such, in some way, an out-of-body experience. And so a lot of the details that I use was really done to do that. And I also wrote, when I wrote the book and with the screenplay a little bit, with a sci-fi consciousness, that this in some way was a science fiction. And I love reading science fictions and science film because you can't take anything for granted. Right. Not the clothes you wear, not the air you breathe, not the words people use, because during the Khmer Rouge, they created new languages. Right. They made us cut our hair all the same. They made us wear black shirts and black pants. They took away our shoes. They created we couldn't call our parents Pa and Ma. We had to call them all comrade. And so in a sense, I had to break my writing into trying to explain it to people in a way that it's not just enough to not have shoes, but what is it like? People understand that you get calluses on the bottom of your feet, but what about your ankles? Right. What about the blade of grass that when you walk by, just slice through your ankle? How does that feel? And that puts me in my body and also explains it in a way to other people that may sound like science fiction.
Do you find, one of the rules I remember from my fiction writing classes in college is that the first metaphor is usually not the best. Look for the second or third because that's when you're actually doing the work of trying to tell the story directionally. Do you find that the pot obviously was a very specific, vivid memory that centered you in your body. Do you find that it's the first thing that pops that you go with, or do you find that you're searching for details that may reinforce theme or sort of evoke a specific sensory world that you're specifically going for?
Yeah. There have been times when you overthink stuff.
Right.
And I always find myself that often, especially I'm writing a novel now, and I find myself thinking stuff all the time. And English is not my first language. So I always thought this was a minus. I grew up speaking Cambodian and Chinese and then studying French and then English. And I always thought it was a minus because I couldn't speak the way Native Americans and Native English speakers speak. And also because I learned...
You probably do better, frankly, than most of us, just to be clear, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you. But as a writer, I also, I didn't start speaking and learning English until I was 10. And then coming to America with my older brother and sister-in-law, and as a 10-year-old girl, picking up English quicker than they did, and then having to interpret and to break down English, American English, and when we go to the doctor's appointment, and when they hear words like truncate, and they don't know, I've spent a lifetime of taking big English words and breaking it smaller in order to communicate with my family or to explain to them what the medication means. And as a writer, actually, it's a huge benefit. Yeah. And especially writing from a world's and from a child's point of view, in that I could easily break down words to its very true essence. And even as an adult, even when I'm writing fiction, I actually like that. I like breaking down words into its true essence. And I mean, I find speaking very difficult, because I find like speaking, you use too many words. I prefer writing when I can actually just take away words and just leaving exactly what I want to say. But yeah, so it's, forgot where I was going with that.
You're doing fine. I'm going to shut up now because I know actually Kate has some amazing questions.
I wanted to touch on this idea of when you're writing the memoir, you know you're kind of writing for a younger audience, and the memoir has gone on to be included in a lot of high school and college curriculums. I was wondering about just kind of this idea that this is my story, but now my story has become not only a teaching tool for myself, but for this bigger thing I was a part of. And just kind of the weight of that responsibility, knowing that your story is going to be a conduit for a lot of people to explore this world more fully.
I'm a human rights first and foremost. My degree is in political science. I've always loved writing. I wanted to be a photojournalist, but I was discouraged from that because English wasn't my first language. I loved stories, I loved books. And when I sat down to write, nobody told me I couldn't. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But with that said, it wasn't my lifelong dream to write a book. I wrote because I woke up one day in April 15th of 1998 to the news that Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge leader, had died. And they were, newspapers and media were covering his last interview in which he said what he did for love. And as a survivor, the thought that somebody said they did for love, which resulted in 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians dead, was, was something that tore at my heart. It was something that I just had to do something about. And because of that, I never went into writing the story thinking it was my story I needed to tell. I was writing a story in which I wanted to negate Pol Pot's legacy. I basically want to take my pen and stab it into him, or his words. I was actually really wanting to reach my hands into the radio and squeeze his already dead neck. I'm an activist, so everybody's perfectly safe with me, but I can take care of myself. If you know the film, I was trained as a child soldier, so, so I wanted to negate his legacy. I've never felt that I needed to own this story. And this is a much bigger story than mine. 5 million Cambodians survived the war, the genocide. And what I can do, it was to write it and to hopefully, and I did a lot of research. I went back to Cambodia 7 times and read a lot of books and a lot of stories, interviewed everybody I could and then it was a process of breaking it down to its essence. So for me, it was, I'm proud. I'm proud that people are reading it. I'm proud, and I did not believe in writing down. I do not believe in writing down. I think sometimes people cater to the lowest common denominators when they're in their work. Why should we do that? I fully expect people who will watch this film and people who will read my book to have a great heart that will allow them to understand what happened to this tragedy and the human atrocity that we survived. I fully expect people to go into it knowing that their hearts will be broken, but knowing that as many times as their hearts break, they have the ability and capabilities to heal. And I do not believe in writing down literally or emotionally or spiritually. But writing using sort of simple language does not mean you're writing down. You can actually write up using really clear language, and as long as you do it with a lot of heart and intention and good story crafting. So for me, I'm very proud, but I've never felt that pressure because I've never felt that it was mine to own.
I think we have time for one more.
I wanted to ask, you touched on this idea of 1998, Pol Pot's death kind of being a jumping off point. If you could go back to that point before you've written the memoir, and this is even the idea of being a film, what do you wish you could kind of go back and tell yourself about this entire process from, the memoir is only an idea to now the film is at the Toronto Film Festival?
Enjoy the ride. I'm very, very blessed in that, a writer writes. A published writer gets his or her work published for various different reasons. I wrote I thought it would be cool to get it published, but I really wanted to write it for my sisters and my brothers and the generations of Ungs that are growing up after out of the ashes of war, who never got to meet their grandparents, who never got to know their aunts and uncles, and who never got to know so many relatives who died in the war, the 20 relatives that died in the war. I wanted them to know how hard they worked to be here. I wanted to write a story of what it takes to survive wars. It's not as easy as you survived it, but that it requires strategies and commitment and work and planning. And then I wrote Lucky Child, and I wanted to tell people what it takes to survive the peace long after everybody's told, have been telling you that the war is over. So I am, what would I tell that girl? You don't have to go through it alone. I think when I wrote it, it was very, very difficult. I really pushed myself to the very, very, very edge. And there were times when I was writing it that, looking back now, I wonder how I even got out of that hole. That I listened to only Cambodian music. I had photographs of genocides and mass graves all over my walls and my apartment. And that I actually put myself in such a difficult, painful situations that it was unhealthy. And I don't think I needed to do that. I think I could have done that with more support. And it's so wonderful to see, again, the film and to know that this narrative is now much larger than mine, that the people who worked on the film, whether they were makeup artists or set designers or composer or cinematographers or directors or the caterers, that we all came together and put our narratives and our imprints onto the screen by the work that we do, and that's a beautiful, beautiful process, to be in. And now I'm a huge advocate and fan of films. I've always loved films, but now I love the process.
I think that is probably the perfect way to close.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Loung Ung. It is an honor. I want to close, and the film screens Monday, 6 p.m. at the Princess of Wales Theater. Definitely see it. I actually want to close with a quote that I kept mentally coming back to during all three of our writers, and it's actually from Alan Rickman. He said, "The more we're governed by idiots and have no control over our destiny, the more we need to tell stories to each other about who we are, why we are, where we come from, and what might be possible." And I'm struck by the fact that so many of the films here at Toronto, so many of the best films that we have, and I suspect that all three of the ones we've talked about today fall into that category, are exactly that. And as a movie goer and as someone who has spent a significant part of their life now trying to help get movies made, I'm so thankful to the Toronto Film Festival, to Cameron Bailey, to Karina Rottenstein, and to all of the writers, but Loung Ung, especially you at this moment. Thank you all so much. Thank you all, and best of luck with telling your stories as well.